Anyone who's followed the news for the last few decades, anyone who's researched admitted mainline history, knows that al-Qaeda was CIA created with the backing and support of the Saudi Arabians and the Israelis, as well as Pakistani intelligence. Zbigniew Brzezinski's written 2 books bragging that in '79 they created the group, had them attack the Russians to get them to then invade Afghanistan so that the Soviets could have their, quote, Vietnam. This is a fact.
FBI translator Sybil Edmonds broke her gag order to blow the whistle on wiretap she translated leading up to and including the day of September 11, proving that Osama bin Laden and al-Qaeda were working for the U.S. government up until the day of 9/11.
All our intimate relationship with bin Laden and Taliban, we did carry very intimate relationship with these people all the way up to September 11.
The al-Qaeda network, with cells spread across the map, is comparable to a can opener for U.S. military invasion, exposing nation after nation to war, sanctions, or humanitarian intervention. National Security Advisor Zbigniew Brzezinski trained these men to entrap the Soviets in Afghanistan, backed first secretly by the Carter administration. Later, the Reagan administration publicly hailed the freedom fighters, carrying out a protracted war that debilitated the enemy. Later, these men were reformed into the Pentagon client al-Qaeda to back NATO interest in the Balkan Wars.
But the hoax is that in the attack against the Serbs to take over Serbia, it was admitted al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden running those operations. And then NATO came in and bombed all of Serbia, and they were forced to give up 1/3 of their land, basically to Albanian-backed Muslim rebels who were calling themselves al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda being used to attack the Serbs. When the Serbs fight back, oh, it's humanitarian, we've got to bomb them.
And now the fact that NATO forces are fighting alongside al-Qaeda in Libya only serves to undermine the official story.
Well, for more on our stories coming out of Libya, we're joined by Dr. Webster Griffin Tarpley, who's an author and historian who's joining us now via satellite from Washington. Dr. Tarpley, thank you very much for taking your time out to speak to us here at Press TV. Now, sir, you've called events playing out in Libya, and I'm quoting you now, quote, a carefully, cynically planned military operation by the NATO High Command, the U.S. playing a very important role in it, end quote. Could you expand on that for us?
Well, if we just look at the events that took place over the weekend under the auspices of NATO's Operation Mermaid Dawn or Operation Siren, we have, first of all, the carpet bombing of areas around Tripoli by the Royal Air Force. They're now boasting about the efficacy of their Paveway 4 missiles, their Brimstone missiles. Lots of civilian deaths there. We had the Apache helicopters being used to strafe civilians with machine gun fire if they got in the way of the advance of these al-Qaeda rebels. We then had an amphibious landing from a series of warships, a NATO fleet that stood off the coast. It looked something like maybe not the Normandy invasion, but maybe the raid on Dieppe or something like that. These were al-Qaeda fighters under European officers. And when I say al-Qaeda, that's broadly including the Libyan Islamic fighting group.
حي الله حي الله رشاشين حي الله تريس حي الله تريس حي الله دراونا حي الله ابو جبريل الله اكبر يا ابو عبد اسال الله يتقبل منكم العمل ان شاء الله امين يا رب نصر لنا باذن الله امين يا رب العالمين النصر لنا يا اخوي ما شاء الله تبارك الله جميع امه ليبيا محمد ما شاء الله تبارك الله اشهد ان لا اله الا الله.
Yeah, well, I think it is, because what we see is the United States engaged and its allies engaged in these blood sports. They foment these rebellions in these countries, and then they have these external forces come in. In Libya, it was the Salafists, many of them backed by Qatar and Saudi Arabia, the most extreme Islamic people you can find.
Western intelligence is in the east of Libya using radical Muslim al-Qaeda backed out of Saudi Arabia and arms out of Saudi Arabia and Egypt to destabilize Gaddafi. Gaddafi then fights armed force trying to overthrow the government, and our media calls them protesters. Protesters who had tanks and missile launchers and Western weapons. Oh, the poor protesters. And the media lied and said he strafed protesters. Turned out that wasn't true. The media lied and said that he'd run to Venezuela to try to give the rebels support, think they would win. It doesn't mean that there aren't groups in Libya who don't like the goofy dictator Muammar Gaddafi. But Muammar Gaddafi is independent and has tried to build a strong Africa outside of the New World Order. And that's why he must be brought down. He doesn't have an international private central bank running his country. They have their own central bank. And that's why the system is doing this. And they think we have no memory where they're telling us al-Qaeda is horrible. We've got to take all your liberties in America because they may attack you any minute. The end of the Bill of Rights, freedom is dead. America surrenders and gives up all its rights to Homeland Security to keep us safe because of al-Qaeda. But then al-Qaeda, who wants to overthrow the secular Arab leader, Gaddafi, is being brought in to do this, and then we're being told it's humanitarian and we've got to bomb them and attack them to protect them. Now it's admitted that British special forces were inside eastern Libya even before the latest rebellion started. So al-Qaeda rebels, and it's admitted that the head of the Libyan rebels was trained by the CIA for decades in Virginia, and he admits that he's working with al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda.
But look, very important, breaking news for you guys. I just confirmed a few hours ago, in fact. Guess who is the de facto military commander of Tripoli as we speak? I'll give you a name.
I'm gonna
Can you guess?
I'm gonna guess it's gonna have something to do with the United States.
No.
No.
His name is Abdul Hakim Balhaj, and he is an al-Qaeda asset.
Wait, whoa. Back up.
Okay, well,
what are you saying here? What are you saying here? Break this down for me.
Let's get the story straight. This is the guy who organized the Berbers in the southwest mountains, southwest of Tripoli, the offensive last Saturday. He was the military commander of this offensive. So he was working in connection with the guys who came from Misrata to the shores of Tripoli, NATO bombardment, the Qatari special forces, the British SAS, etc. But how did this guy show up in the western Berber mountains? So we have to backtrack to 9/11. He was trained in Afghanistan. He was an al-Qaeda asset, part of a very hardcore Salafist Islamist Libyan group called the Islamist Libyan group, exactly, translating from the French, in fact. And he was tracked by the CIA after 9/11. He was friends with Zarqawi. He was captured in Malaysia in 2003. He was tortured in Bangkok, where I lived at the time, in one of those extraordinary rendition CIA prisons in Bangkok. He was sent back to the Libyans. He made a deal with Saif al-Islam in 2009. He was released, and now he's the military commander of Tripoli. Can you believe this story?
He is the military commander for the Transitional National Council in Tripoli?
Yes, yes.
And now we see NATO working with al-Qaeda and handing over Libya to them and billions of dollars and heat-seeking missiles.
Yesterday, I went to the courthouse in Benghazi to see where the February 17th revolution began. 9 months later, Gaddafi is dead and an al-Qaeda flag flies over the courthouse. I guess this means the revolution is over and the battle for Libya begins. This is Raymond Pegnico, reporting for CNN.
Al-Qaeda being used to attack the Serbs. When the Serbs fight back, oh, it's humanitarian, we've got to bomb them. They just move Al-Qaeda around all over the world, call them humanitarian freedom fighters if anybody resists them, and then the UN and NATO comes in and bombs the daylights out of them.
Continue to support these democratic, principled, Al-Qaeda, CIA-linked leaders that we call freedom fighters. Just like Reagan called the Afghan Mujahideen the prelude to Al-Qaeda, freedom fighters. Just like anybody you want to support, death squads, terrorists, etc. If you need to support them, you call them freedom fighters. And if you don't want to support them, you call them dictators and tyrants and murderers and call for humanitarian intervention.